candidly, I didn't know a lot about construction when I joined, but I learned a lot pretty quickly. And, just to give you a sense, this company had a history of starting businesses within their own company. Now, they were construction-related businesses, so the company was a general contractor, but they also started an architectural firm. Then they started a tilt-up concrete business, and they started a very successful real estate development group. And so they added these pieces that always helped kind of the core business. And that was the model we used when we were thinking about technology. I'll kind of get to the end because before I tell the story, but it was really challenging. And a lot of the things that we tried to do didn't work. But it was kind of a stepping stone to what I'm doing now. And Dylan had mentioned autonomous vehicles. That was actually the first technology we kicked things off with. Drones. This is back in 2014. Drones were a new technology. I mean, when you think about drones, think of it as a flying camera. At its core, it's a sensor in the sky. And the firm that I was working for, like I said, was very entrepreneurial. We were one of the first companies in the country, and certainly the first construction firm, to get an exemption from the FAA to fly drones. And so we were an early adopter, and we were using the drone to fly over job sites, and the drone would take a lot of pictures, actually thousands of pictures. And we were using software and analytical tools to really analyze the pictures that the drone was taking, with the idea that we could basically compare what the architect said the building was going to look like to actually what was happening on the job site in real time, with the hope of finding mistakes before they became bigger mistakes. And I was so excited about how we were going to change the world. And then reality hit. I think, and I certainly did, I took for granted the complexities of what it takes to build a building. First of all, when you think about construction, I mean, again, I took it for granted how it affects all our lives. It's where we live, where we go to work, where we send our kids to school. It's just a massive industry. And so when I came onto the job site and I started working with, the men and women who managed the job site, they were very polite about it, but they almost kind of patted my head and said, "Mike, you want to bring a new technology on this job site? Number one, we need to make sure everyone who's on this job site gets home safely every night to their families." And, when you think about a job site, you think about the trucks of steel coming onto the job site. Think of the heavy equipment, the trucks hauling off dirt, and the heavy equipment, interacting with people on the ground, and then the people hundreds of feet in the air. I mean, it's just a really complicated business, and to add anything new is super difficult. Now, the reality is, we did some really interesting things with the drones, and we created a pretty unique service offering. But after 6 years at this wonderful firm working with wonderful people, I realized that doing it within the four walls of one company wasn't going to move the innovation needle, which led me to do what I'm doing now, where Bob and I got connected. So if you can go to the first slide, we've put this BuiltWorlds Venture Group together, and the together are large general contractors and engineering firms who share the belief that, this industry is changing. It's a $12 trillion global industry. And we as the industry need to lead that change, because if we as the industry don't lead it, someone else is going to. And that someone else could be Google, that someone else could be a startup in Silicon Valley. So it should be us at least trying to steer the way of how this industry is going to change. And so if you go to the next slide, we had a kind of an interesting viewpoint to the world. This all came about with a company here, when I talked about kind of these smaller companies I was working with. There's a company in Chicago called BuiltWorlds. And the easiest way to think about BuiltWorlds is it's a membership organization. And our members, the BuiltWorlds members, are large general contractors, engineering firms, kind of strategic players in the construction industry. But more and more, it's also startups, global startups from around the world who created new technologies that want to be part of this network of 100. I mean, it's a pretty big network. It's about 150 member companies, 750 startups. And members join BuiltWorlds because they want to learn about technology that's changing the industry. And BuiltWorlds really educates its members through two channels. One, we have an analyst team that puts out reports on the greatest and best technologies coming out. And we also do events. Now, obviously, before the pandemic, those events were live, and we were doing them in Chicago, we were doing them in Paris, we were doing them in Silicon Valley. Fortunately, BuiltWorlds was at its core a technology company, and we always had a platform to do the events virtually, and we've continued to do that to keep people connected. Just to give you a sense, we've got our global summit in October, where we have 12 sessions, and each session is a different region from around the world, and each region is going to talk about how technologies is affecting their specific region in and around construction. So it was from that viewpoint of BuiltWorlds, we kind of had, and from my own personal experience, we kind of had kind of a view of the massive opportunity, but we were going in this with our eyes wide open about the really big challenges that we face. So the next slide just really talks about some of the opportunities, right? And I alluded to this. I mean, this is a massive industry. It's 13% of the global economy is spent on, construction. Everything from residential to office to infrastructure. There's still needs, even with the uncertainty, we still need to spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure, both here in the US and globally. But this 1.6 trillion number, it's kind of says it all. McKinsey Consulting came out with a report that basically said every other industry basically in the world is growing at it's improving 3% per year from a productivity standpoint. Every industry is getting better. Construction is growing only at 1% compared to everyone else growing at 3%, just from a productivity standpoint. So that $1.6 trillion is basically dollars being left on the table because the construction industries are just doing things inefficiently, right? Why is that? If you go to the next slide, one of the reasons that I alluded to is this is a really complicated business. Like I said, you've got just from every job site, it's almost like a manufacturing plant, right? It's just really complicated to put up a building. Then you take into the effect that when you look at all the various stakeholders, when you put up a building, you've got the owner. Maybe you're building a new corporate office for Google. So Google's saying, I want a new office space. And then they hire an architectural firm, the general contractor, to build the building. General contractor then has to hire the people who actually, the tradesmen and specialty contractors to put that building together. And each of those people, candidly, are trying to move the risk of the things to go wrong on each other. And so it doesn't really create collaboration amongst people, which it's just the reality, right? And then it's really hard for startups, because there's some really interesting startups to get traction because of that fragmentation. Even if they have a great product, it's hard for them to get their technology on an actual job site. And then from an investor's kind of standpoint, investors in Silicon Valley and even, in Tel Aviv, I mean, people don't really understand the complexity of the industry. And so we kind of came up with an interesting opportunity to bring people who really understand the industry together, which is the next slide. And we put together, and Bob mentioned Nick Bellotti from Shibumi, we put together some really large construction firms who, like my own experience, have tried to do investing on their own. And it's hard. So they've said, let's come together. Let's come together, even with competitors. Let's try to work together to move this industry forward. So these people around the table have about 15 billion of revenue through all the work they do. And they're open not only to investing together as a group, but also to whatever we invest in to pilot those technologies on our job site. So we kind of understand the complexity, but we're willing to help those startups get better faster. And most importantly, we're open to becoming customers of any of the startups we invest in to give them a boost to help them succeed more quickly. And the other thing is, because our group is really global, we're seeing startups from around the world. So just to give you a sense, we had, before COVID, I guess right in early March, we had companies from Israel and Paris, come to Chicago and present. And it was really great. Now, since then, we've been doing our virtual demo days. We just had one actually yesterday. So again, even we're trying to keep people connected even in these challenging times. And then the next slide, as I mentioned, how has COVID-19 affected kind of what we're doing? Full transparency, it obviously slowed things down. We kind of took a step back and said, how are things changing? And we kind of came to the opinion that COVID-19 was just going to accelerate things that were already happening in the industry. And so these are some of the kind of key areas we're focused on, like robotics, collaboration tools, module prefabrication, kind of building things off-site so they get to the site kind of half built already. And kind of through, I was hoping, Amanda, if you can kind of show that video just to give people a sense of kind of the technologies we're looking at. And this is actually a 3D printer that actually produces a building. It's pretty amazing.
Where's that building located?
I think this is Paris.
Okay.
So you can just see, this is taking kind of specialized concrete and putting it in basically a printer and just layering it up and layering it up to actually create a structure. And there's a number of these 3D kind of printing startups that are popping up all over the world. But I just wanted to show this video because it kind of gives you a sense of.
Like I said, we actually got some wounded vets fooling with this on a much smaller scale.
Right. Yeah. Well, listen, these startups are always looking for good technical people. And these types of technologies, the startup world is starting to, get a sense of how big this industry is. And so you're seeing much more sophisticated entrepreneurs spending time on the space. And what we're trying to do with BuiltWorlds is kind of connect all the dots and understanding the challenges that this industry faces to help kind of bring down the walls and move the needle, or move the kind of the innovation needle forward. So I know that was a lot for people. I, more than anything, wanted to give just people a sense that the construction industry is changing rapidly, and because of that, there's going to be a ton of opportunity. I think one of the big issues that, especially in this country, the industry faces is a labor shortage. There's just not enough people to do the work, and so they're trying to figure out, ways to be more efficient. And I think, because of the technology changes that are happening, I think it opens the door to smart people that are part of your organization to maybe take a second look at an industry that maybe they didn't consider before.
Michael, let me just add a couple of comments to what you were talking about. Like Michael illustrated there, they've got 10, 12, 15 US companies, another 10, 12, 15 Middle East companies. They've got Arab companies, they've got Turkish companies, they've got Israeli companies coming together to make investments in opportunities that initially will change the construction industry. But it goes beyond that, because technology is changing the way we get meals delivered to our house. Technology is changing the transportation industry. Technology, as you just saw in that video, is changing the way buildings come together. And what they're looking at, and I love it because they do it without political or geographic boundaries, they're looking for opportunities. So if you've got an idea, I was just approached by one this week, a vet named Kevin Blanchard, who many of us know, who lost a leg and then walked across South America giving out prosthetics. But Kevin Blanchard put me in touch with a guy who's working with a concrete company out in the state of Washington, making concrete that you apply a sealer to, and it cures within 24 hours to full strength. Now there's a technology opportunity that might just fit into the type of thing that Michael's dealing with. Who knows?
Right.
Lord knows in the real estate industry, there are going to be opportunities with sales, resales, transfers of properties, ownership even, that are going to be affected by what we're going through with the pandemic and technology. So there are opportunities here, and some of them are right in front of our nose, and we don't even realize it. I know Michael's on the site here. I saw before. He's developing an app to deal with traumatic brain injury. I don't know how or where that's going to apply on job sites, but I think Michael's application for the Michael Malone, his application, his app for dealing with traumatic brain injury is going to have a lot bigger opportunistic impact than anybody realizes. Now, how do you apply that to workers on the construction site? I don't know, but this is the kind of idea that's popping out.
Now, people have questions or they have startups that think might be a fit for things we're looking at. And a minimum, I might be able to be helpful to connect people to the right people if we're not a fit. But like I said, I really appreciate the forum to talk and just let people know what we're doing.